As many of you already know, I am a massive fan of the classic Universal monster movies, with my all-time favorite being The Wolfman from 1941. And I can say without any exaggeration that I am pretty obsessed with this movie. I have the Wolfman tattooed on my arm, I have posters proudly displayed in my apartment, I have t-shirts, books, figures, masks, model kits, you name it. I friggin' love the Wolfman. Hell, I even like the 2010 remake. So, you guys can only imagine how excited I was when it was announced that Blumhouse, in association with Universal Studios, were going to be making a new Wolfman movie. Well, I was excited until the trailers were released. And then images from Universal's Halloween Horror Nights were leaked. Yikes. Needless to say, I began to worry that this movie was going to be utter garbage. And my apprehension only got worse when early reviews started coming out saying that this movie was pretty bad. Well, I decided to take the risk and go see the movie myself. And I have to say that I actually really enjoyed it. Though the movie is flawed, it is still an enjoyable monster flick with a different spin on the iconic werewolf. But before we get into it, don't forget to follow me on social media, check out my paranormal podcast, and to like, share, and to subscribe to help the channel grow. Now that all of that stuff is out of the way, let's get down to the review. Just a heads up, there may be some minor spoilers ahead while I'm discussing the plot, but I will do my best to avoid giving away any major plot points that will ruin the movie for you if you choose to go see it. So the first thing that needs to be addressed is that this is not a remake of the 1941 classic, which I think is a good thing. Not being a remake gives this movie the opportunity to be its own thing, and not have to stand in the shadow of the beloved original. However, it does feel a little gimmicky that they called this movie Wolfman. I think Blumhouse were sitting on a werewolf movie script for a long time, and they were just finally able to get the license to use the term Wolfman from Universal, in hopes that it would draw in monster fanatics like myself. Well, if that is what they did, it certainly worked because I did go and see the movie. So this movie starts out back in 1995 in the backwoods of Oregon. A young boy named Blake is out hunting deer with his father, Grady, when they encounter a strange and unknown creature lurking in the forests. Thankfully, they escape unharmed, but upon arriving at their isolated farmhouse in the mountains, Blake finds out that his father was already well aware of this creature, calling it the Wolf-Faced Man, and his father intends to hunt it down. Fast forward 30 years later to the modern day, and Blake has become a fully grown man and has left the natural beauty of rural Oregon behind in favor of some shithole city where he lives with his wife Charlotte and his daughter, Ginger. Blake then receives a package from the state of Oregon telling him that his father, who went missing during a hunting trip many years before, has officially been declared dead. And it is now up to him to return to his childhood home in order to clear up the property of his father's possessions. Of course, his wife and daughter are rather reluctant to this idea, but they end up agreeing anyway. But unfortunately, once they enter the Oregon wilderness, they are attacked by a ravenous beast that leaves Blake injured and infected. The rest of the movie is about Charlotte and Ginger trying to survive the night as the beast from outside tries to break into the home, all while Blake slowly transforms into a monster. So that's the basic plot. And I don't think it's a spoiler to say that the creature that's lurking in the Oregon woods is obviously a werewolf, and the curse has been passed to Blake. So there are several things that I actually really enjoyed about the plot. First and foremost is that it was a relatively small story. And by that I mean it wasn't some grandiose adventure with deep-seated lore and dozens of forgettable characters. It is simply a story of a family who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they come face to face with a monster. And that really reminds me of what horror movies used to be, like in Halloween or Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Small, relatable stories that make you think that this could happen to anybody, even you. Another thing that I really enjoyed was the subversion of expectations. Now, when I go to see a movie called WolfMan, there are some things that I just expect to see. A shot of the full moon, talk of curses and legends, and silver bullets and the beast within. But this movie literally doesn't do any of that, which makes the story more grounded and believable. All of the characters seem confused and bewildered about what is going on, like any of us would be if we were to happen to encounter a monster like that in real life. And thankfully, since this film isn't bogged down with long, drawn-out exposition dumps, the movie has a relatively fast runtime of about an hour and 45 minutes. So, that was definitely a plus in my books. Other films could really learn a thing or two about not wasting the audience's time with boring, meaningless conversations. Now, I have been seeing online that some people are complaining that this movie is really slow, and that the majority of it is taken up by Blake slowly transforming into a werewolf. And I honestly think a lot of those people are grossly exaggerating. Though it is true that the second act of the movie is about Blake's transformation, I never once felt that it was drawn out to the point of boredom. We are constantly seeing him go from one symptom to another, gradually watching his face, body, and mannerisms become more animalistic and feral. I also thought it was really cool that the movie shows us his metamorphosis from not only his perspective, but from the perspective of his family's as well. For example, there's a scene where he is talking to his family in coherent sentences, but then we see what he's saying from their perspective, and he's just grunting and gibberish. Then we see his senses heightening from being able to hear a spider climb up a wall to being able to see in the dark. Now, obviously, we have to talk about the look of the werewolf itself. The thing is, I think a lot of people went into this movie expecting a werewolf transformation like what we saw in The Howling or in An American Werewolf in London. But unfortunately, that is not the case. However, I personally did like the way they did the look of the monster in this movie. But it is far more subtle than the werewolves from the 80s, and it's more akin to the original Wolfman. For example, as he starts to change, he starts to get more of an underbite with protruding fangs, and a strong brow that goes into the bridge of his nose. So I guess I can understand why people didn't really like the look of the monster, because it's not exactly what they were expecting. But it should be pointed out that in this movie, we do see another werewolf that has changed years prior, and that monster is far more wolf-like. So it is heavily implied that what we are seeing with Blake is just how this transformation starts, and the longer someone is like this, the worse they get. I should also bring up that in this movie, the werewolf curse is not dependent on the full moon to cause a transformation. It would seem that once you get infected and you become one of these monsters, you stay like that permanently. There's no redemption, there's no cure, you're just completely fucked. So in a way, it's less of a supernatural werewolf movie, and it's more of a movie about a super infectious, aggressive form of rabies that turns the infected into a feral beast. But either way, I liked it. Okay, now let's talk about the acting. The problem with this movie is that the cast is so small that all of the actors have to be perfect, because if one person is not up to par, it throws the whole thing off. And unfortunately, that's what happens in this movie. Julia Garner plays Charlotte, and I use the word plays very loosely because she's barely acting in this movie. I can only think of one scene off the top of my head where she shows any emotion. The rest of the movie, she is just staring at whatever is going on with a blank expression on her face. The worst part is, there are scenes where she is witnessing some legitimately disturbing shit, and she doesn't react to it at all. It's just a very odd choice by the actor or maybe the director, and it sticks out like a sore thumb. Thankfully, the guy who plays Blake kind of redeems it because he's the best of the bunch. The way he goes from just a normal guy to then being sick as a dog, and then he starts realizing that he's changing into something bad and he can't stop it, it's actually quite believable. As for the rest of the cast, they do a satisfactory job. Unfortunately, not everything was great about this film, and they did make the cardinal sin of movie making by having a handful of scenes where it was so dark that you couldn't see what the fuck was going on. Thankfully, they were few and far between, but they were annoying nonetheless. Finally, I want to bring up the special effects. Thankfully, this movie had no noticeable CGI, and all of the werewolf effects were done practically. And yes, this movie does have one scene that could be considered the official transformation scene, and it looked pretty good. So, horror fans should be happy about that. So, in conclusion, The WolfMan 2025 was an enjoyable but flawed movie. It had an original story with a different take on the werewolf curse, it wasn't too long or boring, and it had some cool scenes, and a bit of a twist in the third act that I won't spoil for you guys. However, the acting was uneven, and there were some bad lighting decisions that made seeing the action rather difficult at some points. If I had to give this movie a rating, I would go with a 6.5 out of 10. It's not perfect, but it's far from terrible. Good enough that I will be buying it when it comes out on Blu-ray, and I think it will fit in nicely with my Halloween monster movie marathon when October comes around. But of course, I want your guys' opinion on this movie. Have you seen it? And if you have, what did you think about it? Let me know down in the comment section. Overall, thanks for checking out my video, and I will see you guys in the next one.